Hello everyone, Theodore Shoebat here, giving you guys another message that you will not hear at church. I guarantee that. Today I want to talk to you guys about people using the image of Charles Martel as some sort of a mascot for right-wing political agendas. And I really think that this is annoying. It's really getting annoying because they take Charles Martel, right, and they sit there with their very common slogans, defend Europe against the hordes of Islamic migrants, right, coming from Somalia. Defend Europe from the malnourished hordes who have very little nutrition and are coming in from countries that are suffering greatly from starvation, and yeah, they're going to invade Europe. And so let's use Charles Martel. And Charles Martel fought the Muslims, and so we are going to use this image for our movement. Defend Europe. Be like Charles Martel. This is why I find this to be annoying. Because Charles Martel did more than just fight the Muslims. He actually spent most of the time, in regards to battles, right? In regards to fighting, Charles Martel spent most of his time fighting other Europeans. And he had a battle with the Muslims. The Muslims tried to invade France, and they got their asses kicked. The Muslims got their asses kicked completely. But for the most part, Charles Martel was dealing with other Europeans who were trying to conquer his land, conquer his territory, and steal his stuff, trying to steal his money. It was like, like today. Today you see families in America rival with each other, trying to, or rivalries within families. People trying to take each other's money, trying to take each other's inheritance, and that's pretty much what was happening in Charles Martel's life, except it was on a much wider scale. But if you look at his life, it's really interesting. There was a civil war between 715 and 718, from 715 to 718. And it says here on Wikipedia, Pippin's death occasioned open conflict between his heirs and the Neustrian nobles who sought political independence from Austroasian control. In 715, Dogbert III named Ragenfrid mayor of their palace. September 26th, 715, Ragenfrid's Neustrians met the young Theobald's forces, etc., etc. They had a battle called the Battle of Compiègne. And then there was the Battle of Cologne in 716. Chilperic and Ragenfrid together led an army into Austrasia, intent on seizing the Pippinid wealth at Cologne. So the Pippinid family, that was the family that Charles Martel belonged to. And they were trying to steal Martel's money. They were trying to seize his inheritance, the inheritance that he got from his father. And then moving on, he was fighting, Martel was in conflict with a group of people called the Frisians. And the Frisians were a Germanic people. And I think their descendants today live in Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. But it says here, the Neustrians allied with another invading force under Radbod, king of the Frisians. So the Frisians were now invading territory in France. Not Muslims, Europeans. So some crazy guy named Radbod, king of the Frisians, met Charles in battle near Cologne in Germany, which was still held by Plectrud. Charles had little time to gather men or prepare, and he lost. And then there was the Battle of Ambleve. And then there was the Battle of Vinci. And this battle interests me the most because there was a force of Frisians that Charles Martel was in conflict with. And these Frisians were so savage and evil that they burned down churches and murdered Catholic clergy. This was in the 700s. And it says here, in joining Chilperic and Ragenfrid, Radbod of Frisia sacked Utrecht, burning churches and killing many missionaries. Willebrod and his monks were forced to flee to Echternach. Gerbeding suggests that Willebrod had decided that the chances of preserving his life's work were better with a successful field commander like Martel than with Plechtrud. Willebrod subsequently baptized Martel's son, Pepin, and it says here, Gerberding, those names sounded really interesting. Radbog, that's a cool name. Gerberding suggests a likely date of Easter 716, etc., etc. And it says here that Charles took time to rally more men and prepare by the following spring. Charles had attracted enough support to invade Neustria. Charles sent an envoy who proposed a cessation of hostilities if Chilperic would recognize his rights, etc., etc. The refusal was not unexpected, but served to impress upon Martel's forces, etc. And then it says here there was the Battle of Vinci, in which Martel fought the Germanic people, the Frisians, in March 21st, 717. The victorious Martel pursued the fleeing king and mayor to Paris, but he was not yet prepared to hold the city. He turned back to deal with Plechtrud and Cologne, etc. And then there was the wars of 718 to 732. So from 718 to 732, Martel was fighting other Europeans. More specifically, Germanic peoples. And then there was the Battle of Tours in 721. So within that time, within that conflict between Europeans, 718 to 732, in the midst of that, in 721, that is when Martel fights the Muslims and defeats them. So for the most part, Martel was fighting violent, aggressive Germanic tribes. And he himself was the aggressor at some points. And this is what I've heard. So my point is that why take a guy, make him... I have no problem with using Charles Martel. But apply Martel in accordance to his actual life in terms of combat. If you're going to sit there and say, well, Germany is not going to rise again. Right? There's not going to be another Reich. There's not going to be a tyrannical Germany again. And I've heard all sorts of stupid theories or stupid reasons that people give to substantiate this idea that, Germany is never going to rise again. They say, Germany has no weapons. They're like, what, the third or fourth producer of weapons in the world? They don't have an army. Well, they have like the 8th largest army in the world. Something something close to that. I think it's like the 8th or 9th or 10th largest army. It's definitely in the top 10. That's what I've heard. They are the most powerful country in Europe. So this whole idea that Germany is never going to rise again is insane. You have Russia rising up, right? They've expanded into Ukraine. They've also expanded into Georgia. That's what happened in the Bush administration. So they have been expanding little by little. And then Germany has been using Russia as the big boogeyman to justify militarism. And you have Russia, right? Big, powerful country. Most of its GDP comes from oil sales. Or at least a substantial amount of it comes from selling oil. 50% of Germany's GDP comes from exports, right? It's a big industrial country, sells a lot of products, sells a lot of washer machines and toilets and dishwashers and Volkswagens and all that. And a lot of people buy their stuff. So 50% of their GDP comes from that, from selling their products. And then in the middle, you have Poland. Poland is smack right in the middle between Russia and Germany. And Poland is, or has been, I should say, rising economically, becoming a substantial economic force. I think it's like the 18th largest economy in the world, or something to the like of that. Is Germany going to sit there and allow a country that it has conquered in the past, is it going to allow a people that it has genocided in the past to rise above it? No, not going to happen. So I really think that Germany is going to rise again eventually. And there is going to be another Reich, and it's going to be very violent. But then you have these right-wing types that come along, and they're like, that's never going to happen. What's really going to happen is all the Europeans are going to unite, and we're going to gather together, and we're going to fight the Muslim hordes, like Charles Martel. And that's why they go on Twitter, or they go on Facebook, or they go on YouTube, and they will sit there and use the image of Martel. I've seen this many times. Oh, Charles the Hammer Martel. Charles the Hammer Martel. Defend Europe. But here we have stories of Martel fighting other Europeans. Europeans killing each other for decades. Here we have Martel defending his territory from aggressive Germanic tribes. Here we have Martel donating substantial amounts of land to the Holy See, to the Catholic Church, defending Christendom. Defending Christendom not just against Muslims, but against Germanic peoples who came and burned down churches, slaughtered monks. You know, it wasn't all just a bunch of nice Catholic white folks in those days. People had this idea that, oh, there was Christendom and everybody was Catholic. No, that's fantasy land. That never existed. Europe, right, what we today call Europe, Christendom, had always conflict within itself. And there were always people trying to destroy Christendom by fragmenting it and breaking away from it and then attacking the church. We saw that with the Cathars, we saw that with the Bogomils, we've seen that with numerous groups. We saw that with the Hussites, heretical separatist group that tried to make a independent Bohemian Hussite state. And that caused a lot of damage. And then we saw the culmination of all of this in the 30 Years' War, in which the world witnessed the utter fragmentation and death of Christendom, right? And Christendom was lying in bed on life support, and then in the French Revolution, Napoleon came over and just pulled the life support out, and Christendom died, and that was the bottom line. But my whole point is that you got all these crazy people out there who were like, ooh, defend Europe, when Martel was defending Christendom, when Martel spent most of his military career fighting Germanic peoples. So I like Charles Martel. I have no issue with Charles Martel because I've read some of the history and I think it's very admirable. A lot of things that he did was very admirable, defending the church against the Muslims, against the Germanic peoples. But don't sit there and isolate the military career of Charles Martel to just one battle, the Battle of Tours, and say that was Martel, and that's why we have to support European nationalism and identitarianism and all this garbage. Because that's what these identitarian freaks are doing. They're taking Charles Martel and they're comparing him with Leonidas and saying they're the same thing. So all of a sudden, Charles Martel, this warrior of Christendom, is now paralleled with some sodomite boy lover named Leonidas. It's really sickening. It is very sickening, and I don't think Martel would even appreciate this. In fact, he probably would be insulted by this. I don't know, but I will tell you, I think it's sad and it's just disgusting because you see this right-wing political racist identitarian shit stain on the history of Martel, and it's very annoying. It's very annoying. If you had people come out like myself and say, listen, we see Germany rising up, we see the Ottoman Empire rising up, let's be like Charles Martel. Let's use the image of Charles Martel to prepare the minds of the people and say, hey, listen, Christendom fought aggressive Germanic peoples. Christendom fought Muslims before, like Charles Martel. Now, if I could see that, if people were doing that, which they're not, but if they were, I would appreciate that, and I would see no issue. But when I see people taking Martel, and out of all the battles this guy fought, isolating him to just one battle and say, hey, that's why you should support our movement because, you know, we're good Christians, or we're good Catholics, and we have Charles Martel as our mascot, that's just... It's mediocre and it's just vacuous. It's empty to me because it ignores literally millennia of history. I mean, I know I keep talking about World War I, World War II, but if you look at the war that Christendom has had with anti-Catholic Germanic people, I'm not generalizing all Germanic peoples. I know there have been many, I should say, great Germanic peoples who have fought for Christendom. If you think about it, Martel was Frankish, and the Frankish were originally, I would say, Germanic peoples. I mean, I think the Franks, if I'm not mistaken, were people who came from Scandinavia or something like that. But with that said, the conflict that the church has had, the conflict that Christendom had between anti-Catholic Germanic peoples, I mean, there are many. It's a history that goes back millennia. Well, almost millennia. You can go all the way back to the 5th century, and numerous times the Germans sacked Catholic Rome. I believe it was Pope Pius V who actually led battles against the Germanian people. And then you had a guy like, what's his name? Frederick III, if I'm not mistaken. I think they called him Frederick the Great. Pro-Muslim, German king, very anti-Catholic, and he was called Antichrist by the church. So if you want to see conflict between the church and other Europeans, well, you're going to spend many years researching it, because that history goes back centuries, close to 2 millennia, I would say. A millennia and a half, you could say this goes back. If we are to say that Charles Martel is a prophetic person, and I believe that he is, if we are to say that he is prophetic in that him fighting the Muslims presages a revived Ottoman Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire against the nations that God chooses to fight them, then we also must say that in the future there are going to be evil European nations who will also rise up and be aggressive and be genocidal and imperialistic. Because in the military career of Martel, he, for the most part, was fighting other Europeans, which means that in the future, there are going to be Europeans who will be evil, who will be genocidal, and who will be anti-Christ. And they will make alliances with the revived Ottoman Empire, and they will be evil. And it really is as simple as that. To sit there and ignore all of that history is vacuous. It is ahistorical, and it's annoying. It's just annoying and childish, really. Anyway, thought I would tell you guys that and get that out of my mind, get that off my chest, because I'm seeing a lot of this stuff, just letting you guys know, so in case you see it, you know, okay, this is bullshit. Someone is using Charles Martel to justify some right-wing bullshit. And that's that. Some crazy identitarian eugenist who are really closet Nazis. They say they're not Nazis, but they call themselves eugenists. They are using Martel to justify racialist, nationalist, and eugenist agendas. And that's really the bottom line. This is Theodore Shoebat. Hope you guys have enjoyed this message. Hope you guys have learned something from this message. You just heard some theology. God bless, and God be with us. And if you want to learn more about true Christendom, what Christendom really was like, and how they really saw Christianity, get my new book, Christianity is at War. If you haven't gotten this book yet, you need to, because let me tell you something. After reading this book, Bible studies will never be the same again, and you will never see Christianity the same again. You really never will, because it really is going to teach you the true militant spirit of Christianity and how the mission of the Christian life is to war and destroy evil. So if you haven't gotten this book yet, go get it today. Go get it for your Christmas shopping. Christianity is at War. Get the book today.